Joining us on the show today is AI expert and researcher, Dr. Alan D. Thompson. He's the author of one of the most widely followed newsletters in the world covering the latest developments in the AI and robotics markets. And he includes premier analysis and research of the companies that are involved in this fast-growing space, the technological breakthroughs that we're seeing, and how these are all being leveraged in new and innovative ways that continue to surprise many of us. Alan, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks, Chris. It's going to be an exciting month and quarter, I reckon. I was thinking just recently, every morning I wake up, it feels like Christmas morning. There's always a new large language model or a new humanoid or some new development in the artificial intelligence space to blow us all away.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to do a little bit of a mea culpa here because last time we spoke, I remember the Hollywood writer strike was in gear at the time. And, I was basically kind of pushing back on some of the fears by a lot of these writers, especially when it comes to video, saying that, if you look at the videos that are out there that are generated by AI, they look kind of gruesome and weird. They're nowhere near the point where I think we'd have to be worried about them replacing jobs. And yet just recently now, we have OpenAI's Sora generating video, and what we've seen is just astonishing. So what are your thoughts on just how far we've come already?
Really is a crazy one. Sora, Japanese for sky, and they really came out of nowhere with this release. Again, I woke up one morning and there it was, and there were, 20 example videos that we could go and get a feel for, even doing 3D modeling or getting behind the scenes and playing around with the physics underneath these videos. It's being called a world model. Even OpenAI refers to it as that, which is really the peak of artificial intelligence. We want to get to a model that has an understanding of what's going on around us. And this one does. Sora is groundbreaking, 1080p, so high definition. Filmmakers have already started screaming about just what this is going to do for jobs. You might have seen an article about Tyler Perry, the producer, stopping work on his billion-dollar film studio because he looked at the outputs of Sora and went, this is changing the world right now. You can imagine studios like Pixar or DreamWorks picking this up to replace all of their animators and to release this beautiful animation. But it's also really, really good at real life, even if that real life doesn't exist. I've never seen a pirate ship floating around in a cup of coffee, but this world model was able to conceptualize that from scratch. And the examples are just outrageous. It's to the extent where it will pick up reflections of the scene in people's eyeballs, and you can see that quality in the output. So I'm not surprised that our filmmakers are wondering what's going on and what's next for them.
Yeah. So again, when we go back to our last discussion with the Hollywood writer's strike, at the time, the technology was not quite there. When you think about AI generated videos, it's there now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it may be costly right now. OpenAI, the creative team have gone on record saying maybe this is too expensive to go and make a feature-length film. But consider that our feature-length films generally have a budget measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So even if it's costing, $10,000 per frame, I'm pretty sure we'd be okay generating an end-to-end scene with what they've already got, with this technology that they've already got. It's just going to cost a lot for now.
Right. Yeah. You can carve pieces of the production process out to the AI generated studio, so to speak, if you want, at this point, right? We're not at the point of a full production film, but here's the thing. You just hit on a really key point. I mean, a lot of the money that's been going into this space so far, when we think about OpenAI or Microsoft, I mean, it's been for business development. It's also been for individual use. There's a gaming application here. But now if you're talking about Hollywood production, you're talking about multi-million budgets. So that's a whole nother source of demand that could be plowing into this space.
Yeah, exactly. And it may be right now we don't have the GPUs or the TPUs or the LPUs, which are these graphics cards that run these models, to be able to serve everyone. You've seen the run on NVIDIA and the shortage of those particular cards. Well, now that we've got all these different industries wanting it for different inference applications, I think that's only going to get worse. And that may be why we've got people like OpenAI's CEO trying to drag out $7 trillion from the UAE to develop new chips with a lot more money that are a lot faster. But right now, hardware is a bit more of a bottleneck.
Well, I think this just goes to show that if you are underestimating or poo-pooing the progress that we're seeing, typically you're going to end up losing out on that bet. And you have a whole section in your memo devoted to what you refer to as, what is it? Who moved my cheese?
Every month I award the Who Moved My Cheese AI award. You remember that business classic, right? That book that we all had to read in the 80s or the 90s, which was essentially about keeping up with innovation. Well, we're surrounded by Luddites. We're surrounded by people who want to say, this isn't working or this is going to kill us. And I'm just flagging the historical notes for people who've been saying the most outrageous things over the last year or so every month.
Is there anyone in particular, any forecast that you have archived in your various memos over the months or years in this Who Moved My Cheese that really stands out to you the most?
I have to point out the EU, which consists of 27 countries, have won the award twice for their AI Draft Act and just for their stance on artificial intelligence in general. It's like they went, all right, we can't actually create here, so let's be critics and let's put laws in place to stop innovation. Well, of course, you and I know that's never going to work, but I'm waiting for them to get the hat trick, the full 3 in a row.
Well, and I mean, if we think back to the internet or the computer, I mean, there was a lot of people at the time then who were saying, there's no application here. Who's going to want to stare at a screen or type on a keyboard? I mean, there was a lot of examples of that where people just got it so wrong. And we see that happening again. I mean, there are notable names out there and experts who also, they come to this conclusion that AI will never be able to surpass human intelligence on this or this or this. And it seems like every month, every year, it continues to surpass expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your view on pre-Sora, which was only a few weeks before Sora came out, you were not alone. So James Cameron, the famous director, said in July 2023, I don't think AI could even write a screenplay. And his quote was, let's wait 20 years, which takes us to 2043. And if an AI wins an Oscar for best screenplay, then I think we've got to take him seriously. So it's a public perception that's pretty standard. It's the psychology of we're humans, we're the best, we're at the top of the apex, so to speak. I just thought it would be cool to log this because we don't have a lot of quotes from the dawn of electricity or the dawn of our first heavier than air airplanes, those kinds of things. So it's a really unusual track of what's happening right now that I think we'll look back on in a few months and go, there you go. Some more humans being human.
Right. Right. Yeah. A little bit of hubris there, of course. But like you said, I mean, historically speaking, we have tended to be at the top of the food chain there, but we're continuing to be surprised every day. And one thing that we did discuss with you last time that I'd like to get an update with you on, which I think is very important and salient to this conversation when we're talking about AI versus human intelligence, is the massive multitask language understanding. This is the test that's used to evaluate the performance of these AI models. It uses 57 different subjects. And you had talked about how Google Gemini had just reached a new intelligence threshold by being the first to outperform human experts. This was a major breakthrough. Where do things stand on the MMLU front today?
Yeah, great question. Look, I don't lean on the MMLU as a gold standard benchmark. It's just that it's one of the big ones that all the models test against. One of the criticisms of the test is that it probably has a couple of percent error rate inside it. So, for example, it was designed by humans. It's got multiple choice answers, and sometimes the humans have made mistakes. In thousands of questions, they're not going to get everything right. That's for AI to do. So I'll preface it with that. The MMLU is used by everyone. So Google used it recently to test their Gemma model. The Gemini model just before that, of course, achieved a score of 90% on the MMLU. And then OpenAI retested GPT-4 via Microsoft and also got 90%. We haven't broken that yet. And at the moment, GPT-4, which is actually a very, very old model, was probably ready in August 2022.
Oh, that's light years away.
It is. It's a very long time ago. Has not been surpassed by anyone. Maybe Gemini is matching it, but we really haven't gone much further. And I think, the next conversation we have, it'll certainly be beaten. But a lot of these other AI labs are just not able to catch up with whatever secret sauce OpenAI and Google have been applying to their models.
Like you said, this is not a gold standard necessarily, but this is one of the probably most popular benchmarks for assessing these models. But there's new models that are coming out on an ongoing basis. Aside from Google and OpenAI, which are two of the best known, what are some of the other models that you're seeing? Because I know that you track these coming out from all over the world, from research labs in France or China. Any new developments on this front that we're seeing?
So up until recently, we didn't have that many models out of, let's call it the EU. We had Germany with their Aleph Alpha model from 2021, 2022. It's only been recently that a company called Mistral AI came out of stealth. And just in the last few weeks, Microsoft has chosen to invest in Mistral, now valued at $2.1 billion. Wow. The new Mistral large model has just come out as well in the last few days. It has an MMLU score of 81.2, which is way up there. It's, in the top 5 at the moment of large language models. And they say it's on par with GPT-4. Obviously, there's a bit of a difference between Mistral's score of 81.2, GPT-4's original score of 86.4, and the new 90 scores that we're seeing when we're retesting these models. But I'm pretty impressed to see a French lab come out of nowhere alongside a lot of the Silicon Valley labs that we'd expect. And of course, out of China, we don't get much of a look in the Western media, but there are a lot of models there as well.
So Microsoft is now investing, obviously, in OpenAI's model. They've done that. They purchased the rights to that years back. And so now they're investing into this French model.
That's right. Yeah, they've got their fingers in a lot of pies. They, like Google, came to this a little bit late, and I think they're making up for lost time. That means a lot of investments, a lot of partnerships, and a lot of pivoting their entire model. We can certainly see that with Google. There was a recent analysis by Gartner that said search engine volume will drop 25% in the next few years. So I can finally see an explanation for why Larry and Sergey rushed back into the Google offices to start helping with programming and testing the large language models that we've seen come out of there over the last 12 months.
Would it be safe to say that the US is still clearly in the lead on a lot of these models? I mean, when you look at Google Gemini, and like you said, with ChatGPT, also with the MMLU score, is it still US in the lead here?
I wouldn't say that, Chris, and not just because I was a former permanent resident of China, but because I keep my finger on the pulse there, even day to day right now. They have crazy models that, again, we don't really see given our bias here for local media. We don't look to our neighbors, but China has a huge number of large language models coming out at a rate that is far faster than what we see over here in, let's call it the Western world, but the US in particular. So just in the first couple of weeks of this year, so January, a little bit of February, China released large language models and took up about 50 to 60% of the count of model releases. If we compared that to the US, they might be about 25%. And then the final quarter is by some other Asian regions and some European regions and some models that have international cooperation. For the Chinese models, it's not just about quantity. They're obviously churning these models out. It's also about quality, and they do have some amazingly high quality models, some that are on par with GPT-4, and some they say are even better than GPT-4. I do want to make the point here that China is also one of the main choices for open source models. You'll see a lot of developers using DeepSeek's models. You've got the E34B model. You've got a lot of models to choose from where perhaps China doesn't have the same rules and safety mechanisms that are needed through places like Silicon Valley.
Okay, so quantitatively, you're saying that there's a lot of new models coming out of China, but also qualitatively, they are also meeting certain benchmarks and thresholds that you would say are at par or even better than some of the ones that we're seeing coming out of these big US tech firms?
That's right. It's kind of difficult to test the really big ones over here. I'm in Australia because to even log in and play around with them, you do need to be in China. You need the Chinese cell phone number. You probably need some special Chinese login to get in there. But if you look at models like Baidu's Ernie model, and that's a really big one in competition with GPT-4, the Chinese citizens sitting there in Beijing or Shanghai get access to that as a chat model like ChatGPT. And the feedback is that it outperforms what they're seeing from a normal GPT 3.5 output. It's not just Baidu, though. You've got Zhipu, which is ex-Tsinghua University. You've got 01.ai. Alibaba's in there, Tencent's in there, ByteDance is in there. So I think we could say both regions, China and US, are in a bit of a space race to get us to superintelligence.
You know, we just spoke with a guest recently about some of the developments that we're seeing in China where they're taking a lead, particularly in the area of quantum communications. So quantum information systems cover quantum computation, quantum communication, and quantum encryption. China is beginning to take a lead in a number of these various areas on the quantum side of things. This is not just sci-fi anymore. This is now pushing out into commercialization, into actual products, into military defense applications, cybersecurity, communications between satellites. It's fascinating. And artificial intelligence is obviously front and center when we think about this technological arms race between the US and China as well.
Yeah, I've been really surprised just to see how accessible they've made it. Obviously, they've got a far larger population than the US, but to see US developers going and grabbing something like Qwen, QWEN, and using that as their base model instead of Llama by Meta AI has been a bit of a surprise to me.
And one of the arguments that's been made as to why China should continue to excel and progress perhaps even faster than the US when it comes to these AI models has to do with the fact that they have such a large population. So there's so many more people to train it on with a lot of the interaction that takes place. Would you say that that's a substantive argument for further progress? Does that play a role at all?
It's certainly an interesting perspective. We talk about these models being trained, not programmed or scripted. There's no algorithm. We're not really teaching it besides some of the fine-tuning and reinforcement from feedback. But it does come down to the size of the data sets that it's allowed to train itself on. So in a nutshell, these models are given a big wad of text, maybe it's terabytes of text, and they go and train on the equivalent of thousands or tens of thousands of years in a data center for wall clock time, about 6 months. That data, though, the choice of the text data and how much quality scientific data, how much quality book data in there, how much web data is really one of the keys to unlocking the gold in this space race. So China has obviously a different language than English, which means that it might be a little bit difficult for us to get access to. But certainly the difference between repositories, between data sets, between corpora is a big thing. And we're seeing a lot of that in negotiations at the moment. OpenAI paying millions and millions of dollars to publishers to get access to the best data.
Data is key here, of course. And there's a lot of data that's available in China, especially given, I mean, you just think about the fact that they're basically cashless. It's almost all digital at this point through your mobile phone. There are lots and lots of cameras, lots of digital surveillance taking place for facial recognition that's used for training a number of these models. So they have a system in place that is perhaps speeding up that reinforcement process with human feedback. So it'll be interesting to see what developments we continue to see there. And like you said, they're pushing forward and they're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. You make a good point there. So my reference to data sets was just about text. But of course, we know that the latest large language models, if you even want to call them that, they're often called multimodal models, including Gemini and GPT-4, are trained with more than just text. So those visual elements that you get, even from CCTV, may be useful in training these big multimodal models. You've got video, you've got audio, you've got images, and some models are even trained with joint movements and other data to help it understand more of the world.
Now, I do want to get your thoughts on a subject because I know that you've been a longtime follower and researcher into brain-machine interfaces. You can see that just by looking at your website right at the very top with the image that you have there at lifearchitect.ai. Just this year, we saw a pretty significant development, perhaps even last month, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first human implant of a Neuralink. How significant is this?
I love the idea of brain-machine interfaces because rather than the conversation being about AI replacing us, this is centered on AI augmenting and amplifying our own biological abilities. And that's my entire drive. So brain-machine interfaces, also called BMIs, some people call them brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, have been at the forefront of my work for a little while. You've got Elon Musk's Neuralink, and we've been counting down to these trials for months and months, some might say years. You're right that they just released some information on this, and there's been some criticism on how this information was actually given to the public. Normally, it would come out through a preprint or would be published research. Well, this is Elon we're talking about, so he just makes it a short tweet with very little information. But the information we got was this had been implanted. That was successful. The guy woke up. The guy is healthy and fit and is able now to move a mouse with his mind. And I'm sure we can assume that he can also type with his mind as well. It's these benefits that really excite me. So obviously our first clinical trials are going to be about augmenting or resolving disability, bringing ability back to life. So this guy might be paralyzed, he might be a stroke victim, there might be some other disability that's going on there. But next up, we're going to be resolving disorders. Think about things like anxiety or seizures or pain. Then the next step is augmenting humans worldwide for anything. Imagine having a completely infinite memory, or having an IQ at the level of Einstein, or having limitless creativity, or even something sci-fi sounding like thought transfer, being able to communicate via thought. All of this is something that has been promised by these BMI creators, including Neuralink and some of its competitors.
And that may sound sci-fi or maybe even scary to some people, but I mean, I think it's coming. It's just inevitable because of what we've seen already conducted, not just with this first implant of the patient, which has been so far successful as far as I understand. And it just opens up a whole range of various applications that you listed that are going to be possible here. And we're going to continue to see improvements. One thing that I want to point out is whenever I'm talking with people about brain-machine interfaces or having a computer chip in your brain. And my mom, so she has Parkinson's, and she actually got a deep brain stimulator. So it's basically, it's an electrode. It's like a small computer chip. It gives off a small frequency or voltage deep into her brain. And it literally reversed the symptoms that she had after she got it surgically implanted deep into her brain. And it's amazing because when it stopped working because of a battery issue, all of those symptoms came back. So it really, really made a huge difference in terms of, like you're discussing here with disorders. So this is technology that has actually been in use for Parkinson's, epilepsy for many years. People don't even realize that. They think that this is something that's brand new. Neuralinks, the surgical method they use, is new, but implanting chips or electrodes into a person's brain, this actually goes back a few decades and has been shown to be very effective.
I'm glad to hear it resolved your mum's issue, and it's fascinating to hear that as soon as it was taken out, those issues came back. One of the things I'm most looking forward to, Cris, is replacing invasive surgery, and Neuralink is still invasive despite it being a tiny little thread thinner than a hair being inserted. But we will have non-invasive methods of wearing BMIs, for want of a better term. You've got a competitor by Dr. Mary Lou Jepson, who gave us the One Laptop, One Child project. Her company's called Open Water, and her BMI is completely non-invasive. You put it on like a ski cap or a beanie, we call it here in Australia, and it has red light that penetrates the bone of the skull and is able to communicate both ways with the brain. So think about going from all this money spent on surgery and going under the knife, even if it's optimized to the way that Elon Musk has done it for Neuralink, to just putting on a hat or even clipping on a little device.
Yeah, actually, my boss has one of those, and he uses it, I believe, every day. So it looks like a bike helmet, and it's got a whole bunch of red LEDs in it. You know, it's supposed to help with cognitive performance, memory, all sorts of different things, and he swears by it. He loves it. So yeah, there's non-invasive, there's invasive. And one of the reasons I think it's important just to point to the example of, someone with Parkinson's, because I think we all have to admit, like, if you were in that situation, and if you were told, hey, you can either take these drugs and expect that, given the prognosis, that maybe 10, 15 years to live, something along those lines, or there's also this option, which will help in many cases, either reverse some of the symptoms or at least slow it down so that you can lengthen the quality of this person's life. A lot of people are going to go with that. And when you see the success, like I've seen with my mom, a lot of people are going to end up going with that. And so that fear factor of a brain chip, or even if it's something that's non-invasive, it's a calculation that I think a lot of people are going to make, and it's increasingly going to be in people's favor.
Absolutely. I think we could say that for the entire field of AI, that there are only benefits here. All the criticisms, all the negativity that I'm seeing are for very, very unlikely scenarios, and people are spending inordinate amounts of time focusing on this black hat thinking. But one of the ways of resolving that is actually to try it out yourself, and it doesn't have to be a brain-machine interface. It was exemplified with the release of ChatGPT. Now you've got availability of text-to-image models like Adobe Firefly. You've got text-to-song models. All of this may help with giving people a sense of solace or comfort that AI is here to amplify and augment us, not to destroy our lives.
Yeah, and I do want to give you credit because in one of our prior conversations, you'd pointed out Poe.com. So that's POE.com. And it's basically a repository of all of these different models that we've discussed today and many, many more, along with all these different applications that people have developed for different use cases, whether or not it's writing articles or generating images. I mean, it's got everything, even counseling, you name it. I've been using that basically every day since you first mentioned it, and it's part of my workflow. Are there any other services or applications that you yourself have come to rely on or recommend to others to try out?
Yeah, I love that you flagged Poe. It's still one of the best platforms, offering about 20 different models. They seem to update it frequently. So we just mentioned the French company with their Mistral large model. That's already in there. It's a competitor to GPT-4. It was released in the last couple of days, and there it is staring me in the face inside Poe. I probably use GPT-4 exclusively in that particular platform, but I've been playing around with a music generation model called Suno, Suno.ai. You go and type a sentence for whatever you want to hear. Maybe it's a specific ballad, maybe it's a specific genre that is your favorite, and it will generate you a new song from scratch. This was only a dream a year ago. I mean, we had OpenAI's Jukebox that was not very good. The capability of Suno is outrageous, and taking us full circle to Microsoft's investments, they've decided also to grab a hold of Suno. It's built into Copilot, but even just using it standalone, it's about $10 a month. To use the version 3 of Suno, which is in alpha at the moment, you're listening to bleeding edge AI generating full fidelity songs from scratch. That's one of my focuses at the moment. I've moved on a little bit from Poe, and I just use Gemini Ultra inside Gemini Advanced day to day because it's a bigger and better model than GPT-4, probably the best model at the moment right now. And also in my workflow is possibly going back to GPT-4 as needed and getting it to generate full documents for me. So in my latest keynote, we generate a business case end to end in 3 minutes and have it give us a Microsoft Word document, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and a Microsoft PowerPoint slideshow from scratch in 3 sentences. It's incredible to see.
Yeah, that's something that we're starting to experiment with ourselves. Again, yeah, so many different applications. Is Google Gemini's model, is that not available in Poe.com?
No, not yet. There is the Pro version of Gemini, but it's about 10 times smaller than Gemini Ultra. So to get access to the full Gemini Ultra model, I have to go back through gemini.google.com. And they're adding new functionality to it all the time. So as of a couple of days ago, it can play around with Python code, and it can help out with some tool use in contrast with GPT-4. They're getting pretty close now.
And when you were talking about Suno, this is the generative AI music that's provided through Microsoft, right? Suno is a Microsoft product. How does that work? I mean, are you basically just prompting like you would ChatGPT, for example, hey, I want a song like this, or are you putting in the lyrics? How does that work?
Either or, yeah. The default is make me a song about X, and you can give the genre as well. So I've been playing around with anthemic ballads with female soaring vocals, and it sounds like a really good pop song out of the US somewhere. That's what I've been playing with at the moment, but we have limitless genres to choose from. You don't have to give it the lyrics. By default, it will generate those using something similar to GPT. Although you can go and generate lyrics yourself, or you can even write lyrics yourself if you want to use your biological brain, and it will integrate those into the genre of music that you've chosen.
And again, all of these songs, I mean, basically you're becoming a music producer. All of these songs are uniquely generated. They're not taken from, like the lyrics aren't taken from another song. The voice may sound similar to another artist, right? But they're all unique.
Absolutely. It's really important to understand that these AI models have not stored what they saw in the data sets. So GPT-4 probably saw 30 million books. It hasn't memorized any of them. It was allowed to go and crunch through connections between those books for 10,000 years, but then it threw out all the original source data and just kept, let's call them the neural connections. It's the same with music. It's drawn connections between hopefully millions, maybe billions of songs, thrown all those songs out and kept whatever it learnt during those tens of thousands of years of training.
And I know that people have asked, like, how does this work? And there's been attempts to explain it. But even the creators of these models, like we've discussed with you in the past, they can't quite explain it. And in some ways, they refer to it as almost like magic or alchemy.
That's right. Yeah, that's a quote from Dr. Ilya Sutskever, who's the chief scientist of OpenAI, hopefully still. We're waiting to see how his role is going after the the big board coup with OpenAI, but he was a co-founder of that company and one of the smartest people in the world. So he was trained by Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, understands neural networks down to the maths and physics level, and yet he's saying the best explanation is that this is like alchemy. Give it enough data, give it enough compute, and we're now measuring compute dollars in billions of dollars, and something magic happens in that training process.
Yeah, I've spoken with another guest on the show who wrote a book about artificial intelligence, how it works. And, he tried to boil it all down to math. And there was some physics, but mostly math and statistics. And, it was interesting because I kept telling him, like, I feel like there's a disconnect on what you're saying, because you're saying that this is all just a statistical distribution. What is going to be the most probable word that comes after? And, I kept coming back to him and saying, it seems like there's just a lot more happening than what you're trying to say it is. And I don't know if I got through to him, but that magic component, it's the qualitative aspect of it that goes beyond just a statistical probability, just beyond math. And that's the thing that I think, like you said, Ilya and many other AI experts have also described, that the training process and the output that you get from it after going through the training, it's almost indescribable.
That's right. And that may be why we had such a long AI winter. If Alan Turing gave us the concept of artificial intelligence in the late 40s and early 50s, nothing much happened between then and 2020. And just before 2020, Google gave us the transformer. But it may be that the hardware and perhaps the data availability was just not there until very, very recently. So maybe what we understood in the 70s, 80s, 90s with neural networks was not even able to be applied until we had this massive, massive scale. And I don't want to understate the extremity of this scale. For example, GPT-5 training right now and Gemini probably trained on 50,000 graphics cards, maybe 285,000 CPUs. These are huge, huge numbers. And we're not just running it on those computers for a few hours. We're now taking months and months for it to finish drawing those, let's go back to your statistics, maths, basic numbers out. And after it's had tens of thousands of years to crunch all that, that's when we're seeing this, I like the word magic, but more and more we're uncovering these emergent abilities, which are achievements that are being unlocked, like its ability to persuade others or to have a sense of awareness.
Yeah, that's the key word right there, is emergent. And that's part of complexity theory, complexity science, which is really, I think, the best framework to use for understanding these things, because the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts, right? And that's where we're starting to see emergent properties come out of these models, to the point where, again, you can talk about Google Gemini or even OpenAI's latest GPT model beating all human experts. That's going to continue. It's not like, that's it, we've stopped. And as you said, right, you believe that we're slowly and inexorably moving towards artificial general intelligence.
I don't even know if it's slow anymore, Chris. We are in the middle of the exponential curve. So we've gone from maybe horizontal with a slight angle to this little elbow, and very soon it's going to be close to vertical. And as we see what has been called the technological singularity taking off, some of this stuff is going to be more and more frightening for us to be able to get our minds around, wrap our emotional arms around. Dr. Ray Kurzweil says it's a really fascinating time in human history to be alive.
Yeah, and according to Ray Kurzweil, he's had a long-standing prediction going back decades even, that we'd see artificial general intelligence by 2029. That's only 5 years away now. And again, given what we discussed today, it looks like that may end up becoming true, if not even faster. So I know you follow his writings and work. Has he moved that timetable up, or is he still sticking to that 2029 forecast?
Ray's actually been quite verbose over the last few months. I think he's sticking with his predictions there, but given the exponential pace of change, I'm wondering what we're going to be starting to see over the next few months and years. I've gone on record, even as recently as last year, saying that this might just be a few months away rather than a few years away. So less than 3 years away for us to achieve a machine that can perform any task that an average human can perform. And then that enters into artificial superintelligence. And that's when we feel this extraordinary rate of change that will be called the singularity.
Yeah. So again, I mean, if we're talking about the MMLU, so this is the massive multitask language understanding model. It's 57 different subjects. So passing 90, which Google Gemini just did when we last spoke, that was beating out human experts. That's still not considered artificial general intelligence. So I guess the question is what is the benchmark that we use to say that it's here?
For some people, that is the benchmark. Gemini, GPT-4 were the peaks of artificial general intelligence. And in fact, Microsoft went on record and their original paper on GPT-4 was called First Contact with an AGI System. So there are many scientists and researchers that say, right, this system has a cognitive ability that surpasses experts, and it's certainly at the level of an average human across any field. What's stopping me from saying it, and many others, is that it doesn't have embodiment. So it can't do basic stuff like clean my benches or, clean my gutters, for example. There are obviously a lot more examples, but it can't grab a paintbrush and paint, or it can't listen fully to something. I mean, you've got Gemini and GPT-4 that can hear. One of the other things that it can't do is smell. It can't detect fragrances. And I think all of these abilities are within the reach of the transformer model given to us by Google. It's just going to be a matter of months until we see every human sense brought to life through artificial general intelligence.
Well, and on that note, I know that you feature a lot of different developments we're seeing in the robotics space, which is closely connected to what we're seeing in artificial intelligence, of course, as the hardware and software link up to one another. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're seeing some explosive developments happen with robotics in terms of sensory touch and all of these different things that I would think, get us to where what you're saying is possible.
Explosive's the right word, Chris. Absolutely. I feel the same way. I've got a log of humanoid robots that have been deployed to production over the last few months. And we've got everything from 1X's Neo robot, which is backed by OpenAI and potentially has a large language model within it as well. So maybe it's already using GPT-4, all the way through to the Chinese robots. And everyone's seen the Tesla Optimus Gen 2, which now has these very fine finger movements. So we're seeing more of this pop up. And I think by the end of this year, we'll see some of these humanoid robots, not just in production in factories or on job sites, but also showing up in the home.
And as we're talking about this threshold of crossing artificial general intelligence, it sort of makes me think that it's going to happen. Some think we've already seen, like you said, early contact or first contact with it. But I'm kind of thinking that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a way that most people are just going to basically take for granted, where, it's not going to be this necessarily earth-shattering development where, something that you would expect in a sci-fi movie. It's just going to end up happening. And then we're going to look back and maybe we'll recognize it for how momentous it was, but it's almost like it's just happening sort of under the radar.
Yeah, I feel that as well. Not with the people that I consult with, not with the enterprises and governments, but from a general public perspective, it's been really unusual to see where people are at and what they can actually grasp. And I include myself in that as well. I went to dinner with a group of friends recently, and there was an older lady there sitting next to me, and I showed her the latest text-to-image model on my phone. I used a website called mage.space. It's a free platform, no login. You can just go and type in whatever you want. And she typed something to do with her dog and went, oh, that looks really nice. and then went, well, I don't know what I do with this. So there's a really strange public perception that I think also will be solved by AI, that AI will help us expand our imaginations as well. So it's not that people really need to be forced to sit up and take notice. You know, ChatGPT was a great watershed moment, but over the next few months with video models, with robots, AI is actually going to help us embrace AI.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see that being true. Well, Dr. Thompson, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you and get an update on some of these recent developments that we've seen. Yeah, again, your research is top notch. I mean, not only are you tracking a lot of the developments that we're seeing, but you're also providing really groundbreaking analysis on how to understand these things, a framework to put it together, ways of tracking them in terms of, what we're seeing with the MMLU benchmark and others, models coming out from various parts of the globe. Such cutting edge research. And I know that it's followed by, I believe you had told me, over 10,000 people around the globe now at this point, including a large number of Fortune 500 companies and governments as well, all reading your research. So with that said, what is the best way for our listeners to gain access?
I'd love to have you come and join the memo. It's a bestseller now, Cris. I think you mentioned in 142 countries. We've got RAND in there, we've got NASA in there, we've got Harvard Business School in there, lifearchitect.ai/memo. It's designed to be monthly analysis of AI in plain English, and it's been a bit more frequent than that, even over the last couple of years, just because AI is exploding.
That it is. And I'm sure we'll have much more to talk about when we speak with you in another few months.
Awesome. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Cris.
If you have any questions or feedback on what we discussed today, or if you'd like to get in touch with us about our asset management or financial planning services, you can do so by going to financialsense.com and clicking where it says Contact Us. As always, don't forget to spread the word about FS Insider with your friends and family and share our podcast on all of your social media channels. For FS Insider, I'm Cris Sheridan. Thanks for listening.
Financial Sense News Hour is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the News Hour each involve their own unique risk factors, which are not discussed on the show. Responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the Financial Sense staff and do not take into account listener suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Financial Sense News Hour and its parent company shall not be liable for any financial losses that result from investing in any companies mentioned in Financial Sense or arising out of the use of any material on the News Hour. Be advised that you invest at your own risk.